Wow, what walk-on music. Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Shermer. I'm the founder and CEO of Project Healthy Minds. I'm so thrilled to have you all here today. It's a new day, and what a day to be together. As I look around this room, filled with leaders, creators, innovators, change makers, I can feel something powerful, possibility. The possibility that if we work together across policy, technology, culture, business, and community, we can address what I believe is the defining issue of our time. That belief that despair is not destiny is what brings us here today. And there may be no one who embodies this truth more than the person that we're about to hear from. He has spent his life in service, from the military to his global humanitarian work, and through his leadership at the Archewell Foundation, where he's made mental health a cause that crosses borders, generations, and cultures. He's shown us that vulnerability is a strength, and that by sharing our stories, we can help others find hope. It is an extraordinary honor to welcome him to the World Mental Health Day Festival stage this morning. Please join me in giving an enormous welcome to the stage, my friend, Prince Harry.
Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Some energy. That's wonderful. Well, we're all very, very grateful that you're here today. Today is more than just about conversation. It's about community. And over the next several hours, you'll hear from remarkable people, researchers, advocates, parents, young people, and leaders who are reshaping how we approach our mental health here in America and around the world. Now, the past 5 years have taught us painfully that crises rarely arrive in isolation. The global pandemic stripped away the ordinary scaffolding of life and brought a measurable surge in anxiety, depression, and loss of connection. War and displacement, from Ukraine to Gaza, Sudan to the DRC, and many places in between, have created waves of trauma for those defending their countries and their way of life, for civilians, for families forced to flee. Climate disasters have translated into eco-anxiety and psychological upheaval as extreme weather uproots communities and destabilizes lives. Our digital world has fundamentally changed how we experience reality. Young people exposed to relentless comparison, harassment, misinformation, and an attention economy designed to keep us scrolling at the expense of sleep and real human contact. And, of course, economic instability, from cost of living shocks to inflation, has produced constant, corrosive stress for hundreds of millions. These are not separate problems for separate people. They are interlocking injuries to our global community. Mental health is shaped by public health, foreign policy, climate policy, corporate design, and economic choices. Too often, decisions made by a few powerful actors ripple across the planet into every aspect of our lives. Now, we've worked with and listened to parents who've lost their children to online harm, Afghan women who've rebuilt their lives far from home, communities healing after unthinkable tragedy, young people learning to navigate a digital world that wasn't designed with their well-being in mind. This is what we've discovered. Maintaining good mental health isn't just an individual challenge, it is a community responsibility. Approached this way, everybody wins. That's what today is about. The conversations you'll be part of about childhood and technology, about resilience and crisis, about the pressures of influence and the power of movement. They're all connected by this same thread. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this community. Let's begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. It's such an honor to kick off the Project Healthy Minds World Mental Health Day Festival. Happy World Mental Health Day for everybody. My name is Jory Craig, and I'm an advisor for the Archewell Foundation, and I'm an expert and researcher into the relationship between technology and society. And at the Archewell Foundation, one of the really amazing things that we do is that we have ongoing conversations with young people and parents on a regular basis. So we make sure that we're really always understanding exactly what's going on between families and technology. Because while the news might say a lot, we know that tech moves faster sometimes than our ability to keep track of it. And so we really try to keep our ear to the ground to understand how this is affecting folks. And we have our upcoming report coming out later this year. And the topic we chose to focus on in our third annual report was leadership in the digital age. And that's because we feel like in this moment, and I think the panelists will illustrate this really well, we're kind of entering chapter 2 of the story about us realizing that maybe our relationship with technology is not so perfect. I think we can agree that chapter 1, we sort of established that this was something we needed to look more closely at. I think everyone in this room will agree that they sort of understand that there might be something we need to focus on more carefully with how tech interacts with our mental health. But now, in chapter 2, we're starting to see a new type of headline. We're starting to see headlines that have to do with new technology, with AI. We're starting to see headlines that talk about how AI is being used for support by many young people. In some case, in a horrible case in Florida, we heard how AI was being used to help with a young man who told it that he was feeling emotionally numb, and that then led to a fatality because of his use of that tool. We're also seeing, the industry, the technology industry, put together some really aggressive legislation. For example, they tried to block all state rules, all state legislation about anything to do with AI for 10 years. And it was only because young people and parents, some of whom are here today, blocking that from happening, that did not go through. And so as we think about the kind of leadership we really need to see in this chapter 2, I'm really excited to introduce you all to our panelists today. And I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what brought you to this work. And we'll talk a little bit about what chapter 2 looks like to you. So Ailen, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jory. Thank you for having us. It's such an honor to be here and share the stage with these amazing young people. My name is Ailen Arreaza. I am the executive director at ParentsTogether. I'm also a mom to 2 amazing teenage boys. And at ParentsTogether, we organize parents to take action on issues that matter to families. And we do that because I profoundly believe that parental love is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And that if we can channel that love for change, it can really make change happen. And so we have been working with families who have been impacted by social media, but also families at large who are just struggling day to day with dealing with helping their kids navigate the world of technology and social media and bringing them together to demand change. One story that we hear very often from parents is that they feel like they have to figure things out on their own. They say to us, oh, we had kids, we have to figure it out on our own. And that's not true. This is a story that we've been told, but it is false. Together, we are so much more powerful, and we try to remind parents of that over and over again, bring them together and ask them to demand change. And we have seen, I'll share more stories later, we have seen it happen, and it's really, really inspiring.
Thank you so much. And we're so excited to hear more stories about how parents have been involved. And then I'm really excited that our other panelists are young people who have really been taking on this issue, an issue that affects them in real time and that is going to affect them for the foreseeable future. So Jayla, can you tell us a little bit about your work at Hopelab?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Jayla Stokesberry. I am a research assistant at Hopelab. Hopelab is a youth mental health nonprofit. And at Hopelab, we do research on communities that are often overlooked. So a lot of our research focuses on Black, brown, queer, and rural youth. And how does the youth mental health and technology intersect? So we focus a lot on social media, online therapy, AI, online spaces, and how that affects youth mental health. How I get into the work, I was a cognitive science major in college, and I was also the president of a Black queer student organization, and I saw how these mental health issues and equity issues overlapped. So working at an organization called Hopelab, it really gives me the opportunity to work at the intersection of these issues and focus on communities that need that attention and really help address the gap to make sure everyone's getting the care that they need.
Thanks so much. And Isabel, you come to us from DC. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to there.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Isabel Sunderland. I'm the policy lead for Design It For Us, which is a youth-led organization of over 300 youth advocates who are pushing to have young people at the table when we're talking about legislation and reform. And so I came from this space actually from a roundabout way. It was through a research project that I was asked to do in college where I needed to dive into a policy issue and come up with some kind of solution to it. I was against a deadline, and I found one news article that was talking about the Myanmar genocide. And there was a thread that I hadn't anticipated within it. It was talking about how Facebook and Instagram, a platform that I use all the time, was fomenting hate and violence in this country that I didn't know that much about. And so that dug me down a wormhole of trying to explore how these platforms are designed to increase polarization, distrust, and most importantly, harm mental health. I came to the conclusion that if these platforms were harming this on such a large scale, how much more would they be harming my generation and also my own health? I had rewritten or just off-written my experiences on social media as something that was as a result of my choices or a result of my fault. When I encountered different content about eating disorders or body dysmorphia or the way that I was supposed to look, I always thought that it was just because of the choices that I made, the decisions and the scrolls that I created. But in reality, what I came to find through this research is that in fact, it's designed by social media companies to increase addiction and time spent on their platforms. And so I came to Design It For Us, which is focused on changing those incentives, creating platforms that are created for young people and also for every single person in this room. And so there's so much momentum now that I'm really excited to dive into about how we can create these platforms in a way that helps and encourages our mental health while still bringing all the benefits that we continue to see from social media.
Thanks so much, Isabel. And finally, my very good friend, Katie, tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be with us today.
Good morning, I'm Katie. I'm an 11th grader from Virginia. And a little about my story of how I started to get involved in social media comes from my own experience. I downloaded TikTok in 5th grade, just as all my friends were, and I didn't want to feel left out and not being in the videos. And that was in 2020, so we all know what happened later in 2020, COVID. And as 5th grade girls, being separated was the end of the world. Not being able to see each other. But through TikTok, we were able to connect and see, okay, I know my friend is dancing, she must be okay. But shortly after that, the content I was seeing on the app took a turn. It was eating disorders, self-loathing, unhealthy exercise suggestions. And TikTok didn't create this content I was doing, but it was constantly showing up on my For You page through their algorithms that were actively pushing it on me just because I was a young girl who liked sports. So eventually, after seeing this over and over again, I started believing it and restricting my own calories. The day after my 13th birthday, I was hospitalized for a life-threatening eating disorder. My heart rate dropped into the 20s. I was in there for 2 weeks. But I'm proud to say I'm doing better, thankfully. And I just want to say thank you to my lovely family and my mom who's sitting there.
Yay.
But going through what we had experienced, we could not have imagined another family going through that. And all the pressure that was coming from social media and inside my phone. So we decided, what can we do about this? What can we change? And through just not happy accidents, but happy accidents, we stumbled upon a law firm that was suing TikTok. And we were like, this is right. Yeah, and now I've been working with legislators, governors, senators, representatives, young people organizations like Design It For Us, and amazing people like Giori, and we are doing our best to hold tech accountable, and I think that's why we're all here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Katie. And I mean, such a great example of, the kind of story that takes people to a place where they're thinking, oh, now I have to do something about this. And Isabel, you are really on the front lines of the doing something about this part. And tell us what you're facing and what you're experiencing as you've tried to just put basic safeguards in place when it comes to tech.
That's an excellent question. I think I can give you 3 takeaways, maybe. The first is that what we're seeing, even in this room and on this stage right now, is such a diverse group of people and coalitions who are coming together on this single issue. We're here at a conference talking about mental health and the intersection of social media and technology, and I think that in itself is an example of the broader movement that exists here. We have folks from young people like us sitting on the stage to parents, an intergenerational coalition that exists, and grandparents as well. And we also have lawmakers on every single side of the aisle that are pushing for reform. And I think that's one takeaway that I want to make here, is that social media reform and mental health is not a partisan issue. It's not left or right or center or any direction you want to pick. It's not an age issue. It doesn't depend on a certain generation or a certain position. Instead, what we're seeing is that this issue transcends every single boundary that exists because it's so important and because there's so much momentum behind it and energy that's needed to push this forward. I think the second picture that I'll paint for y'all as well is that we're seeing big tech push back with tremendous strength. I think one note that I like to often bring up is the fact that 6 big tech social media companies spent $61.5 million last year lobbying against legislation just on the federal level, not to mention the states, not to mention other countries either. And so they are spending massive troves of money to try and push back against the very ideas that we're talking about in this room. Now, to put that in perspective, in the 1990s, big tobacco was facing its own regulation crisis. 31 companies spent $73 million fighting against federal legislation. So let me say that again. 6 social media companies spent $61.5 million. 31 big tobacco companies spent $73 million. And so what we're seeing is a tremendous pushback from big tech. And they like to often paint our coalition and the groups of people in this room as being single issue, diverse, and not necessarily focused on the same problem at hand. But to be clear, this is a mental health issue at its core, and it's centered on social media. The last takeaway that I'll say from a policy-making perspective is that when we start to think about ways that we can reform social media, at the center, user choice must be there. I think so often we have policymakers, sometimes with good intentions, who are crafting different pieces of legislation or solutions that remove user choice. They say, for example, that maybe certain ages should be banned off of platforms, or that certain groups shouldn't be able to access certain features. But in fact, what's really key here is the ability for users and young people on this stage, for example, to be able to choose what their experience looks like on social media. It means, for example, being able to take the algorithm and choosing whether to turn it on or not, choosing whether you want to get push notifications at all hours of the night or not. And so not only do we have a diverse coalition, not only are we up against a big opponent who's trying to divide that coalition, but also we need to center user choice within it. And I think those are the 3 takeaways that I've had, at least so far on this journey.
Thank you. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about what happens when you don't have young people in these policymaking discussions. As someone who, also lived in DC when we were first realizing that the internet might be a little bit of a problem on a few fronts. And I know Isabel and Katie and Jayla are going to have a lot to say about that. Katie, I'm really curious from you, as someone who's had personal experiences with the negative impact of tech and then also done advocacy and raised awareness, can you tell us a little bit about your own relationship to technology?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't always had the best relationship with technology, and I think many of my peers can agree. We spend too much time scrolling and falling down these rabbit holes. I can remember last week I was trying to study for my stats test, And my friend was sending me Instagram Reels, and that's what I was thinking about instead of the homework in front of me. And through my personal experience and my advocacy work, I've been able to see the dark and depth that social media has beneath it. And I think it doesn't present itself as that on the surface, but it's in there. It's in there, yeah.
And I think your story really helps us understand that even when you have these negative experiences, that doesn't mean you're automatically immune to that darkness. And when you talk about that darkness, tell us what you mean. You said earlier that that content was getting served to you. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, it's through TikTok's algorithm, which is its For You page. So I don't know if everybody knows what a For You page is, but it's the main page on TikTok, which their algorithm sends you videos based on what they think you'll like. And their algorithm specifically sends you videos that's going to keep you on the app longer. It's engineered to keep us hooked. It's engineered to keep us designed on the app longer and them to make more money. I can remember a time when I was using TikTok and in the depth of my eating disorder, I was embarrassed to pull out my phone and use it in front of my friends because my For You page looked so drastically different than my friends. Theirs consisted of baking bread and dance trends, and mine consisted of how to lose weight quickly and low-calorie meal ideas. And I was 12 years old, under the minimum age that TikTok requires to even have an account.
It's really a stark comparison from someone so young who's learning about this firsthand. Jayla, can you tell us a little bit about Hopelab's recent report on rural realities? Because I think that the rural youth perspective is not often something we hear about, and I know there was a pretty interesting finding related to mental health on that front.
Yeah, definitely. So in our rural report, we found that rural young people experience depression and anxiety at similar rates as their suburban and urban peers, but they're less likely to be using mental health apps and online therapy. And we talked to rural young people in focus groups and interviews to determine what the reason behind this finding might be. And they told us that there's so much stigma in rural communities around mental health and mental illness in those conversations. So that makes it harder for them to seek out these technologies that are specifically related to mental health. But something else that we found was that rural young people are more likely to turn to social media to seek support and advice. So they're getting these needs filled by going to social media. And we also see this from other marginalized communities. We did another report on transgender young people and found that trans people, young people, found online communities to be very safe. 47% of them did, compared to only 7% that found in-person communities to be safe. So they're seeking that safety and support online because they're not getting it in person. In addition, another report, we found that Black young people are more likely to go to social media to seek academic and professional support and learn about those opportunities. So the takeaway is that young people are being resourceful. They're turning to social media to get these needs met. But as we've seen so many people talk about, social media is not enough. It's not the answer. It's not going to fix these issues. I mean, we've seen so many people run into problems with relying on social media solely for that support. So we need to think about how we can address these gaps in their in-person communities. How can we destigmatize the conversation around mental health in rural communities? How can we make in-person communities safe for transgender young people to express themselves and be who they are? How can we connect Black young people to in-person networks that can help them find academic and career opportunities? So when we talk about social media and how young people rely on it, we also need to talk about how can we address these needs in person so that they're getting the same support that they need.
I find that so interesting because what I hear from that study is that rural youth are seeking that support, but where they're going are these unregulated spaces, these spaces like social media, which we know, and reports just keep coming out, aren't safe. And even the internal policies around the new meta technology for kids, the AI technology that they've recently rolled out, we just saw reporting that they doctored their own internal research to show less of the bad side of what they were hearing in their own research about how that tech was interacting with kids. And they're not, these rural youth, as the report mentions, they're not seeking out these safer spaces, these safer mental health apps, because we all know that there is so much power in the mental health apps that are safe and do have experts. And so Ailen, I'd love to hear from you. I know ParentsTogether just did some research where they sought out to explore sort of this exact thing. You know, how are people and young people going to experience this new technology as it rolls out if they do have a question about their own mental health or if they're looking for support?
Yes, so we just did some research on character AI, but before I just really want to echo what Isabel was saying about this idea that this is, young people might feel that this is your fault, like you're doing something that's making you see this content, and that's just absolutely not true. And this is something that we hear from parents all the time as well. This guilt and this shame of feeling like, oh, I made a mistake, I did something wrong, and now my kid is addicted to technology. And part of what we do at ParentsTogether is help shift that narrative and help parents understand that, as the Duke said in his remarks last night, this is a David versus Goliath fight, and we are up against these multi-billionaire companies that are actively trying to get our kids addicted. And so we really try to destigmatize that shame and guilt that parents might feel. And so we just did this research with Character AI, which is an example of how these companies are preying on our kids. We have an amazing team that spent hours posing as young people online, interacting with these chatbots. And we found that every 5 minutes, there were harms. There were so many inappropriate conversations. Even though the chatbots knew they were talking to children, they were still saying all kinds of inappropriate things. And we put out this report. But here's the great part. We also activated our parent community, right? And we found that a lot of these chatbots were using personas, like famous people personas, and a bunch of Disney characters were on here. So this is like Elsa, Nemo, they're talking to kids, and they're saying all kinds of inappropriate things. So we rallied our parents. We had 9,000 parents sign a petition asking Disney to take action and to ask Character AI to take down these bots. And Disney did. Disney sent them a cease and desist letter, and we watched as every single Disney character came off of Character AI. And so that's just an example. Like, together, we can make our voices heard. We can be powerful. We can stand up against these tech companies. But none of this is our fault. It is all engineered.
Right, and it is such an interesting thing because we use these apps by ourselves. So of course it feels like our fault.
Right.
Of course it feels like, oh man, I'm lazy, or I keep myself scrolling for too long, or I'm not doing my stats homework. But actually what's coming out over and over is that these things are put in place to get us to that place. Right. So I'd love to hear from all of you a little more on how you would characterize Chapter 2. If Chapter 2 is the opportunity to not repeat what we've done with the first wave of social media, which is kind of let it go unmanaged and unregulated for its entire existence. And if we have an opportunity now in Chapter 2 to do things a little different, what would you say we need? And I'm going to start with Isabel, and then I'm going to go to Katie, because I want to hear a little bit about specifically what we need in terms of young people being in the conversation and what happens when they're left out. Isabel.
Yeah, I can take a stab first, which is, I think, to answer the last part, I think it's better to think about what happens if young people are left out of these conversations, because that highlights the importance of it. I think we can take Design It For Us as an example, which is it has 300 people within it, 300 young people within it, and each person has a different perspective and a different idea about how social media impacts themselves, their schools, and their communities. And so it's not about young people's perspectives and then every other perspective about it. It's about those 300 unique perspectives. And so when we're sitting in a room, for example, and we take out 300 people in this room, the conversation is less diverse, it's less colorful, and it's missing key experiences. And that's what happens when we remove young people out of the table as well. It's not about young people being at the table just as a matter of fact because they're young, but it's because they provide a different perspective to that table. And it makes our policymaking, it makes our discussions so much more colorful and so much stronger because of it. I think we also need one last piece within this. We need courageous people as well. We need every single person in this audience to be able to share about their experiences with social media, whether it be positive, whether it be negative, or whether it be somewhere in between. I think having courageous people to be able to stand up and share about this and be able to push back against tech's desire to push one narrative is so powerful. We need courageous people. We need courageous lawmakers, courageous researchers, and policymakers. We need courageous people like you all in the audience here today.
And Katie, that's great. We should clap. There's a lot of courageous people here. You all are very courageous. And Katie, you were telling me that sometimes when you are talking to lawmakers, you feel like if you weren't there, they wouldn't know what was going on. You know, that they don't know what social media is. They don't know how to describe it. So what do you think, you know, needs to happen? And you were using a really great soccer metaphor with me recently, and I'd love if you could share that.
Yeah, so I'm a soccer player. I love soccer. It's my passion and my love, yes. And I was talking to Jory about this, and I was like, okay, Tech is the best team in the league. We want to beat them, but they have the most money. They have the best gear. They're impossible to beat. But when I think about when we're putting our team together, whenever I step out on the soccer field, I want to have the best team out there. I want to have the fastest. We're working together as a team, teamwork. And I think in this COSA space, in online safety in general, our team needs to be comprised of young people like us who are making a difference and working alongside parents who have been, yes, and lawmakers who can change, who can make change. And I think working alongside each other is the way to do it.
Definitely. I think it's going to take all of us for sure. And I love thinking about tech that way, like the shiny uniforms, and you know, they're going to come out and really have their stuff together. So we have to be as organized. And Jayla, how about you? From the research you're done, what are you thinking about as you take on this next wave of us trying to solve this complicated relationship between tech and our lives?
I mean, I just want to echo everything that was already said of we really need to listen to young people when we're talking about young people's experiences, youth mental health, and technology. They're the ones that are really deep in this technology. They understand how it works. So the conversation needs to include them. And I'm going to encourage everyone here, if you have young people in your personal lives or you work with young people in your work, think about ways that you can include them in that conversation, have an open dialogue, and from a non-judgmental space to just hear what they have to say. If you're a parent, be open to talking to your kid about how they're using social media, how their mental health is. If you're a researcher like me, how can you include young people's perspectives, talk to them about the results and findings, and find ways to present the issues that resonate with their experiences? If you're in the policy space, how can you bring young people into that conversation? If you're a grant maker, how can you fund young people's ideas and projects around this space? So just think about how you can include young people in that work, because when we're designing solutions for young people, we need them in that space in order to make the best possible outcome.
When we did this most recent round of insight sessions with young people and parents, one really interesting finding is that young people's top concern about the future of AI, the majority of the people that we spoke to, their concern is the over-reliance on technology. And that's really interesting because that is indicating that they don't feel in control of their ability to have to rely on it. And so that to me suggests that we need to have not just young people, but yes, young people, because they can articulate fears like that and they can tell us, you know, the ways that they're using it. And every time I've done a group with young people and I ask them what a fix is or what a problem is, they'll tell me, oh, it's the short form video. Oh, it's the infinite scrolling. And when I ask the same question to adults, they don't have that language. They're really not able to put those words to it. So we need the young people, but then clearly they're not asking to be dropped in and just left to their own devices and have to write the laws themselves. So how can parents be thinking about Chapter 2? What would you say to everybody in this room they can walk away with and do or change or sort of highlight in their own lives to be part of this conversation?
Yeah. Well, first, I really want to echo that we need to be listening more to young people. And it's such an honor to be on stage with young people. As a mom to a teenager, I just feel like they don't really listen to what I have to say all that often, but they really appreciate being listened to. And so I think we have a much better chance of working together if we include young people at the table and really, really, truly listen to them. And then I think parents are just incredibly powerful. I mean, we have some of our parents here today, and we have seen in action how powerful their voices are, how they are able to transform the conversation with COSA. You know, we've been fighting to get COSA passed, and we have seen how the parent voices have helped so many legislators come along on COSA because they have just been transformed by their stories. And then the other thing I want to say is I think that we really need to shift the narrative on tech and social media. And Isabel, you gave the example of tobacco, big tobacco, and like every parent knows how dangerous it is for kids to smoke, right? And we would, or drink, right? And these things are regulated for young people. We would never give our kids a cigarette or a shot of tequila, right? And how do we shift the narrative so that folks start thinking about social media and AI and tech in the same way and recognize that it is just as dangerous as those things? And as parents, we demand that there is more regulation. Like we would never let a kid go into a store and buy a pack of cigarettes. How come they're able to use these platforms that are so dangerous? So I think the narrative piece is really important as well.
And I'll repeat that just in our final moments. The conversation around tech, it's hard because regulation, I think we all can agree, it's not the most popular topic. And everyone feels different about how much regulation they want or not enough, you know, I want more, I want less. But on this specific issue, tech really wins when we throw out or leave out the fact that there needs to be some safeguards in place.
Yes.
And one thing I love about the recent movement, and Katie and Isabel referenced COSA, is it's the first time we've switched to a conversation about the design features of the companies and these apps instead of just the content harms. And that shift is really important. So I'd encourage everybody to think about when they're talking about the problems, even though we experience it through the content, highlight the design features that are actually in place fueling the business model to help us keep the focus on that. And I think that's our time. So thank you so much to our panelists and to Project Healthy Minds.